The Galactic Conclave chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian floor, and its ceiling rose so high that clouds actually formed near the top, drifting lazily between the light fixtures that burned like captured stars. 12,000 years of galactic history had played out in this room. And today, another species had come begging for recognition. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the petitioner's platform, a tiny figure in a simple blue uniform, surrounded by beings that towered over her, glowed with inner light, or existed as swirling clouds of sentient gas. She kept her spine straight and her hands steady at her sides. The Velithrans dominated the chamber, their tall luminescent bodies casting soft purple light across the delegates around them. And at their center sat Matriarch Salith, Varani on a throne carved from a single crystal that had taken 600 years to grow. Salith had ruled the Velithran dominion for 800 years, and she had seen 17 species rise to petition for membership in the galactic community. 14 of those species no longer existed. She watched the human ambassador with eyes that held no pupils, just swirling pools of violet light that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations. And she found nothing impressive about what she saw. The species known as humanity, the chamber's ancient AI announced, its voice echoing from every surface, petitions the Galactic Council for recognition and membership. Having achieved faster-than-light travel within the last standard decade, a murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. Some curious, most dismissive Elena stepped forward when the AI finished, and she spoke in a clear voice that carried despite her small stature, explaining humanity's achievements, their hopes for peaceful cooperation, their desire to learn from the elder species of the galaxy. Salith listened with growing contempt when Elena finished. The matriarch rose from her throne, and the entire chamber fell silent. For when a Velithran matriarch spoke, the galaxy listened. "I have heard this speech before," Salith began, her voice resonating with harmonics that made lesser beings feel small. From the Kethari, who burned themselves to extinction in civil war. From the Moldaran, who poisoned their own world. From the Yith Collective, who tore themselves apart over religious differences. She descended the steps from her throne, her long robes trailing behind her like liquid silver. And she circled Elena the way a predator might circle something too small to be considered prey. "Tell me, little ambassador," Salith said, "how long does your species live?" Elena met those swirling violet eyes without flinching, answering that humans lived approximately 80 standard years on average. Laughter erupted from several delegations, a cruel sound that bounced off the obsidian walls. Salith raised one elegant hand for silence, and silence came instantly. 80 years, she repeated, letting the words hang in the air like a judgment. "I have robes older than your entire species' recorded history. I have memories of stars that have since gone dark. And you come before this council asking to be treated as equals." She turned to address the full assembly, her light growing brighter with each word. "They are mayflies," she declared, "playing at civilization. Their lives so brief that they cannot possibly understand the patience required for true progress. The wisdom that comes only with millennia of existence." Elena remained still, her face carefully neutral, though inside her chest her heart pounded with a mixture of anger and determination. "They wage war constantly," Salith continued, now displaying holographic images of human history above the chamber. "Battles and conflicts spanning thousands of years. They fight over resources, over ideology, over invisible lines drawn on maps, over gods they cannot prove exist." The images shifted to show environmental destruction, pollution, extinction events caused by human activity. "They poison their own world," the matriarch said. "They drive other species to extinction. They cannot even achieve peace among their own kind. And yet they come here asking to join a community that has maintained stability for 12,000 years. She returned to stand before Elena, looking down at the human from her considerable height. Tell me, Ambassador, why should we grant recognition to a species that will likely destroy itself before it reaches its second millennium? The question hung in the air, and every eye in the chamber turned to Elena. She took a breath before responding, acknowledging that humanity was young and had made many mistakes, but pointing out that they had also learned from those mistakes, had grown, had reached for the stars despite every obstacle. We do not ask for equality, Elena said, her voice steady. We ask only for the chance to prove ourselves. Sayla's expression did not change, but something flickered in those violet eyes. Perhaps surprise that the human had not cowered. Perhaps merely irritation. The council will vote, the matriarch announced. Returning to her throne, the vote was swift and predictable. Humanity was granted provisional observer status, the lowest tier of recognition, typically reserved for species the council expected to self-destruct within a few centuries. A polite way of saying they were not worth the effort of true engagement. Elena accepted the decision with grace, bowing to the assembly before turning to leave. As she walked toward the chamber's massive doors, she passed through a side corridor where a commotion had gathered, and she found the Velithrin lying on the ground, clutching his throat, his light flickering dangerously. The other Velithrins stood back, uncertain what to do. For their kind, rarely faced medical emergencies in public. Elena did not hesitate. She dropped to her knees beside the fallen alien, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she assessed the situation, recognizing the signs of an allergic reaction. A throat swelling shut, she pulled an emergency injector from her belt, a universal antihistamine compound that human doctors had developed for first contact scenarios, and she administered it without asking permission. The Velithrin's breathing eased. His light stabilized, and within moments, he was sitting up. Confused but alive, Elena helped him to his feet, asked if he was all right, and when he nodded, she simply walked away. She did not ask for thanks, did not wait for recognition, did not even look back. One of Salith's advisors had witnessed the entire scene, and he hurried to report it to the matriarch. Salith listened with her face carved from stone, dismissing the account with a wave of her hand, saying that one act of basic decency did not redeem an entire species. But later that night, alone in her private chambers, she found herself thinking about the human ambassador, about the way Elena had knelt in the dirt to save a stranger, about the look in her eyes when she had asked for nothing in return. It was foolish, Salith told herself. The sort of impractical behavior that got short-lived species killed, and yet her thoughts were interrupted by an urgent communication from the outer colonies. A medical report that made her blood run cold. A plague had emerged on Velithra 7, a disease unlike anything their doctors had seen, one that caused Velithrans to lose their bioluminescence and slowly fade into death. Her youngest daughter, Talon, was stationed on Velithra 7. Salith stared at the report for a long time, and for the first time in centuries, the ancient matriarch felt something she had almost forgotten existed: fear. The colony world of Velithra 7 had once glowed with the combined light of 3 million Velithrans, their luminescent bodies turning the night into a soft purple dawn. But now the city stood dim and the streets echoed with silence in the orbital medical station above the dying world. Matriarch Salith Vani watched holographic displays that showed infection rates climbing by the hour, and each number represented another of her people fading into darkness. They called it the dimming. It began with a slight flicker in a Velithran's natural glow, easily dismissed as fatigue or stress, but within days, the light would begin to fail completely, and the victim would feel their strength draining away like water through sand. The final stage lasted months, a slow and agonizing descent into total darkness. and no Velithrin had ever survived it. Every treatment failed. Every cure proved useless. And their greatest medical minds could only watch as patients slipped away one by one. Salith pressed her palm against the window, staring down at the planet below, knowing that somewhere in those dimming cities her daughter Talon was fighting for her life. Talon had been infected 3 weeks ago. The Matriarch had not slept in 6 days. A chime announced a visitor, and she turned to find Admiral Kethoran entering the observation deck, his face grim with news she already knew she would hate. The Galactic Council had voted to quarantine the Velithrin Dominion, sealing their borders, cutting off all trade and communication, leaving them to face the plague alone. Other species feared contagion, feared that the disease might spread beyond Velithrin biology, and their fear outweighed any compassion they might have felt. Salith received the news in cold silence. She had ruled for 800 years, had built alliances and crushed enemies, had guided her people through crisis after crisis, but she had never felt so powerless as she did in this moment. "There is one other matter," Admiral Kethoran said, his voice hesitant. "A ship has arrived at the quarantine boundary, refusing to turn back." "Destroy it," Salith said without emotion. "Matriarch, it is a human vessel." Salith's light flickered with surprise, and she demanded to know what humans could possibly want at such a time. The Admiral explained that the humans had sent a volunteer medical research team, scientists and doctors who had heard about the plague and come to offer assistance. They know the quarantine applies to them as well. The Admiral added, "They know that if they cross the boundary, they may never be allowed to leave. And they have come anyway." Salith's first instinct was to refuse the idea of accepting help from mayflies, from a species she had publicly humiliated just weeks before, burned in her chest like acid. But then she thought of Talon, of her daughter's light growing dimmer each day, and pride suddenly seemed like a very small thing. "Let them through," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The human ship docked at the orbital station 3 hours later, and Salith watched from a distance as the team disembarked. A small group of 12 humans carrying cases of equipment and wearing simple medical uniforms. Their leader was a man named Dr. Marcus Chun, middle-aged by human standards, with gray streaking his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent fighting battles against disease and death. He walked with quiet confidence, not the arrogance Salith had expected, but the steady assurance of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She met them in the station's main corridor, flanked by guards, her posture radiating the cold authority she had cultivated over centuries. "You understand that you may never leave," she said without greeting. Dr. Chun nodded, saying that they understood completely. "You understand that this disease has killed every Velithrin it has touched, that your presence here will likely mean your deaths." Chun smiled slightly, responding that they had all written their letters home before they left Earth. Salith studied him, searching for fear, for doubt, for any sign of the weakness she expected from his short-lived kind. But she found none. "Why?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Why would you come here?" "To help a people who have shown you nothing but contempt." The human doctor considered the question for a moment before answering. "Because you need help," he said simply, "and we can give it." It was not the answer Salith expected, and she did not know how to respond to it. So she simply assigned them quarters and laboratory space and left them to their work over the following days. She watched the humans through security feeds, unable to stay away, unable to understand what she was seeing. They worked in shifts around the clock, sleeping only when their bodies demanded it, pushing themselves past limits that Velithrin doctors found disturbing. When one human collapsed from exhaustion, the others would carry them to a bed and then return to work immediately. They ate meals standing up, reading data on tablets between bites, and they argued constantly about theories and approaches. Their voices rising with passion that Saleth found almost frightening in its intensity. Dr. Chun was the worst of them, or perhaps the best, sleeping only 2 or 3 hours at a time before returning to his microscopes and computers. A Velithran doctor asked him how he could function on so little rest, and Chun had laughed, saying that he would have plenty of time to rest when he was dead. It was a joke. Saleth realized the humans joked about death, treated their own mortality with a likeness that made no sense to a species that measured their lives in millennia. But there was nothing light about the way Chun worked 3 weeks into their research. Chun requested a meeting with the Matriarch, and Saleth received him in her private study. Surrounded by artifacts older than human civilization, the doctor's face was gray with fatigue, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made Saleth uncomfortable. "The plague is not natural," he said without preamble. "It was engineered, designed specifically to target Velithran biology." Saleth felt the room tilt around her. Asking what evidence he had, Chun explained in technical detail that went beyond her understanding. But the conclusion was clear enough. Someone had created this disease as a weapon. Someone wanted the Velithran dominion to fall. Who? She demanded. "I don't know yet," Chun admitted. "But I know how to find out, and I know how to create a cure." Hope flickered in Saleth's chest. The first she had felt since this nightmare began. "What do you need?" she asked. Chun's expression grew serious, and he explained that he needed a living sample from a late-stage patient. Tissue from someone whose infection had progressed to the final phase. And the only way to obtain it was direct contact. Direct contact meant exposure. Exposure meant infection. Infection meant death. "I'm volunteering," Chun said. "The others have agreed to continue the work if I become unable. We have contingency plans in place." Saleth stared at him, truly stared, trying to comprehend what she was witnessing. "You would die," she said. "For people who are not your own, for a species that insulted and dismissed you." Chun shrugged. A small gesture that somehow carried the weight of everything he was. 80 years or 8 days, he said. "I would rather spend them meaning something." He left to prepare for the procedure, and Saleth remained alone in her study for a long time, thinking about mayflies, thinking about meaning, thinking about a human who had looked death in the eye and seen something worth dying for. She thought about Talon, her youngest, her brightest, fading in a hospital bed below, and she wondered if perhaps she had been wrong about everything. The late-stage quarantine ward was the darkest place on the orbital station, its windows permanently shaded to hide from the patients the light they could no longer produce. And Dr. Marcus Chun walked into it knowing he would likely never walk out healthy. The protective suit he wore would do nothing against prolonged exposure, but protocols demanded it, so he wore it anyway. Around him lay 23 Velithrans in the final stages of the dimming, their bodies barely visible in the gloom, their once brilliant glow reduced to occasional flickers that looked like dying embers. He found Talon in the corner bed, recognizable only from the medical charts, a young Velithran woman who had been vibrant and full of life just months ago. Now a shadow slowly fading into nothing. She opened her eyes when he approached, and even in her weakness, she managed to look surprised. "You are human," she said, her voice thin and fragile. Chun pulled a chair beside her bed and sat down, telling her that yes, he was human, and he was here to help. "My mother says humans are mayflies," Talon whispered. "Brief and foolish. Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Chun replied with a slight smile. "But maybe she does not know everything about us yet." He began his work, taking samples with gentle precision, explaining each step to Talon so she would not be afraid, talking to her as if she were a patient in any hospital on Earth, as if she were simply someone who needed care and comfort. Talon watched him with fading violet eyes, asking questions between procedures. She wanted to know about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests she had seen in pictures, about what it felt like to live on a world where the sky changed colors and water fell from clouds. Chun told her stories. He told her about the Pacific Ocean, about standing on a beach in California and watching waves roll in from horizons so distant they seemed to touch the sky. He told her about the Amazon rainforest, about trees so tall and old they made humans feel like children, about the sound of rain on a million leaves. He told her about his grandmother, a woman named Wei Lin who had survived a war that destroyed her village, who had walked 200 kilometers with nothing but the clothes on her back, who had built a new life from nothing and raised 7 children alone. She lived to be 94, Chun said. And every day she told us the same thing, that life is not about how long you live, but how much love you leave behind. Talon was quiet for a moment. And then she asked the question that Chun had been waiting for. Why do you do this? Why do humans come to help strangers? Why do you sacrifice for people you do not know? Chun finished the last sample collection and set down his instruments. Because someone did it for us once, he said. A long time ago, when we were young and foolish and making every mistake a species could make. There were always people who helped, who sacrificed, who showed us a better way. He took her hand, a gesture that Velithrans did not practice. But Talon did not pull away. We remember them, he continued. And we try to be worthy of what they gave us. Talon's fingers tightened around his, and for a moment her glow brightened just slightly. A flicker of hope in the darkness. Chun stayed with her for 3 more hours, talking, listening, holding her hand when the pain became too much. When he finally left the ward, he knew the exposure had done its work. The first symptoms appeared that night. Salith received the news in her chambers. A report stating that Dr. Chun had completed the sample collection and that preliminary analysis showed promising results, but that the human doctor had begun showing signs of infection. She went to his laboratory without really knowing why. She found him at his workstation, still working, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly, surrounded by holographic displays showing molecular structures and genetic sequences. You should be resting, she said from the doorway. Chun did not look up from his work. I'll rest when this is done, he said. Your daughter's samples gave me everything I needed. I can see the path to a cure now. I just need to finish mapping it. Salith entered the room, moving closer, studying the human who had condemned himself to save her people. How long do you have? She asked. A few days, Chun replied. Maybe a week if I'm lucky, but I won't need that long. The cure will be ready tomorrow. He finally looked up at her, and Salith was struck by the calm in his eyes, the complete absence of fear or regret. I visited Talon today, she said. She told me about your stories, about your grandmother, about the ocean. Chun smiled, saying that Talon was a good listener. She asked me to thank you, Salith continued, her voice harder than she intended. She asked me to tell you that your grandmother would be proud. The human smile widened, and something glistened in his eyes. That's the nicest thing anyone has said to me in a long time. Salith stood in silence, watching him return to his work, watching his trembling hands move across the controls with precision that defied his deteriorating condition. Do you not rage against this? She finally asked. Against the dying of your light. Do you not hate us for putting you in this position? Chun paused, considering the question. Rage is for people who think they're being cheated, he said. I'm not being cheated. I'm making a choice. There's a difference. But your life, my life has been good, Chun interrupted gently. I've loved, I've learned, I've helped people. I've seen things that would make your ancient historians weep with wonder. And now I get to do one last thing that matters. He turned back to his work. My light doesn't die. Matriarch, it passes on to my students, to my research, to the Velithrans who will live because of what we did here. That's what humans figured out a long time ago. That we don't have to live forever to matter forever. Salith had no response. She stayed and watched him work through the night, bringing him water when he forgot to drink, listening as he dictated notes into his recorder, watching as the cure took shape on his screens. When dawn broke over the planet below, Chun collapsed at his station, the prototype cure complete, his body finally giving out. The other humans rushed to help him, carrying him to a medical bed, connecting him to monitors that showed his vital signs weakening by the hour. But the cure worked. The first test patient showed improvement within hours. Talon's glow began to return, and Dr. Marcus Chun lay in his bed, writing letters on a tablet with hands that could barely hold the stylus. Salith visited him 3 times that day. On the 3rd visit, she found him writing to Elena Vasquez, to the human ambassador she had mocked in the council chamber. And she read over his shoulder without shame. "Tell them I was happy," Chun had written. "Tell them I would do it again. Tell them that humans are exactly as foolish and wonderful as everyone thinks we are." He looked up and saw her reading, and he was not angry. "Any last words you want me to pass on?" he asked with weak humor. Salith had lived for nearly 3,000 years. She had witnessed empires rise and fall, had seen stars born and die, had experienced more than most beings in the galaxy could imagine. But she had never felt smaller than she did in that moment, standing beside a dying man who asked only if she had any messages to send. "Thank you," she said. The words inadequate, meaningless, but all she had. Chun smiled and closed his eyes. "You're welcome. Matriarch, now go be with your daughter. She needs you more than I do." Salith went, and she wept for the first time in 800 years. Dio Marcus Chun died on a Tuesday, though the word Tuesday meant nothing in the cold mathematics of Galactic Standard Time, and the only people present were 3 human colleagues and 1 Velithran matriarch, who had no business being there. His final breath came quietly, without drama, and the monitors sang their flat songs while Salith Varani stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to process what she had witnessed. A human doctor named Sarah Park closed Chun's eyes with gentle hands and whispered something in a language Salith did not understand. But the tone was unmistakable. Love, grief, gratitude. The surviving members of Chun's team did not stop working. They mourned in motion, crying while they calibrated equipment, grieving while they mass-produced the cure, honoring their leader by completing his mission within 72 hours. The cure had been distributed to every infected Velithran in the Dominion. 4 million lives saved. 12 colony worlds pulled back from the brink of extinction. Talon recovered fully, a glow returning brighter than before, and when she learned of Chun's death, she wept in a way Velithrans rarely did. Loud and raw and unashamed, Salith watched her daughter grieve for a human she had known for only a few days. And she felt something shift in her chest. Something ancient and calcified finally cracking open. The evidence Chen had gathered proved what he had suspected. The plague had been engineered by the Kreth Consortium, a rival power in the galactic community, designed to weaken the Velithran Dominion so completely that they could be conquered without resistance. It was genocide disguised as nature. Murder on a scale that defied comprehension. Salith called an emergency session of the Galactic Council, and she walked into that great obsidian chamber with fire in her eyes and Chun's research files in her hands. The delegates stared as she approached the central platform. For Velithran matriarchs did not petition the council. They commanded it. "I come before you to honor a human," she announced, her voice filling every corner of the vast room. "A mayfly, as I once called his kind. A brief and foolish creature who had no business meddling in the affairs of greater species." Murmurs rippled through the assembly, confusion mixing with curiosity. His name was Dr. Marcus Chun, and he saved 4 million Velithran lives. He saved my daughter's life, and he paid for it with his own. She activated the holographic display, showing Chun's face, his credentials, his research. His sacrifice. I mocked humanity in this chamber, Salith continued. I called them short-lived. I called them primitive. I called them unworthy of standing among us. And then one of them came to my dying world, knowing he would never leave. And he gave everything he had to save people who had shown him nothing but contempt. She turned to face the Kreth delegation, her light flaring with barely contained rage. And while he was saving us, while he was dying for us, your consortium was counting the bodies you expected to create. She threw Chun's evidence into the central display, files and data spreading across the chamber like an accusation. Every piece of proof that the Kreth had engineered the plague, had planned the genocide, had waited for the Velithran Dominion to fall so they could claim its territory. The chamber erupted. Kreth representatives shouted denials. Other delegations demanded investigations. And through it all, Salith stood like a statue carved from fury when the noise finally died down. Ambassador Elena Vasquez rose from humanity's small section at the edge of the chamber. She walked to the central platform. And even in her simple uniform, she commanded attention in a way that had nothing to do with size or age or power. You measure worth in millennia, Elena said, her voice cutting through the tension. But you've learned nothing from all that time. Humanity has walked among the stars for barely a century. And we already know what you seem to have forgotten. She paused, letting the silence grow heavy. Civilization is not about how long you survive. It's about what you're willing to die for. She turned to face the full assembly. Small and mortal and utterly unafraid, Dr. Chun died for people who despised him. He died for strangers. He died because he believed that saving lives mattered more than saving face. And if that's what you call primitive, then maybe primitive is exactly what this galaxy needs. The Council voted to investigate the Kreth Consortium. It was not enough. The evidence was clear. The crime was undeniable, but too many species owed debts to the Kreth. Too many had trade agreements and military pacts that made justice inconvenient. The investigation would take years. Decades perhaps, long enough for the Kreth to destroy the evidence, eliminate witnesses, and escape any real consequence. Salith had expected this. She had lived long enough to know that galactic politics moves slowly, that justice was often sacrificed on the altar of convenience, that power protected power while the powerless suffered. But she had also learned something new. She had learned it from a human who slept 3 hours a night, who joked about death, who held her daughter's hand in the darkness. She had learned that sometimes the right thing to do was the impractical thing, the foolish thing, the thing that made no political sense. She stood before the Council one final time. The Velithran Dominion will not wait for your investigation, she announced. We will seek justice ourselves, and we will not seek it alone. She turned to Elena Vasquez. Humanity saved us when we had nothing to offer in return. When we had shown them nothing but contempt, they came anyway. They helped anyway. They died for us anyway. Her light softened, and for a moment she looked not like an ancient matriarch, but like someone newly awakened. I do not deserve human alliance, but I am asking for it, not as payment for what Dr. Chun did, but because I believe now that together we might build something worth building. Elena did not hesitate. Humanity accepts within hours. The first human ships crossed into Velithran space. Not a handful of volunteers this time, but thousands. Engineers and soldiers and medics who had watched the news feeds, who had seen what Chun had done, who wanted to be part of something that mattered. The Velithrans welcomed them with a warmth that surprised everyone, including themselves. The Dominion fleet mobilized, and human advisors joined the command staff, their tactical creativity complementing Velithran technology in ways that made military analysts across the galaxy nervous. The Kreth Consortium sent a transmission to both powers: surrender or face extinction. They expected fear. They expected negotiation. They did not expect Elena Vasquez to respond on behalf of the new alliance. Her voice calm and steady, and carrying the weight of a species that had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars and its own worst impulses. "We don't surrender," she said. "We adapt, and we remember." The transmission ended. The war had begun. The Battle of Kreth Prime lasted 17 hours. And in those 17 hours, the galaxy learned something it would never forget. The Kreth Consortium had expected an easy victory, for they had spent centuries building the largest fleet in known space, accumulating weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand supernova. And they looked at the combined human-Velithran force with something approaching amusement. They had studied Velithran tactics for millennia, knew every formation, every strategy, every predictable response their ancient enemies would employ. They had not studied humans. The first surprise came when human frigates, small and seemingly insignificant compared to the massive Kreth warships, darted through the enemy formation like insects, not attacking the obvious targets, but instead targeting communication relays and sensor arrays. The Kreth fleet went partially blind within the first hour. Admiral Keth Oren commanded the Velithran main force, but beside him stood a human tactical advisor named Commander James Wright, a young man by any species standards who had spent his career studying one thing: how to win against superior numbers. "They expect us to fight the way we've always fought," Wright said, pointing to weak points in the Kreth formation. "So we won't." The Velithrans provided overwhelming firepower, their ancient weapons designed for sustained bombardment, while human squadrons performed surgical strikes that disrupted enemy coordination and created openings. It was not elegant, it was not traditional. It worked. Matriarch Salith commanded from her flagship, the Eternal Light, watching the battle unfold on holographic displays that showed human and Velithran ships fighting side by side, dying side by side. She thought of Marcus Chun. She thought of what he had said about light passing on when a Kreth battlecruiser broke through the main line and headed for a cluster of crippled human destroyers carrying wounded personnel. Salith made a choice that would have been unthinkable weeks before. She ordered the Eternal Light between the battlecruiser and the destroyers. She dropped her shields to boost power to her weapons. The Eternal Light took massive damage, entire sections venting into space. But her weapons tore the battlecruiser apart before it could reach the helpless human ships. "Matriarch." Admiral Kethoran's voice crackled through the damaged communications. "Your ship will survive," Salith replied, watching the human destroyers limp towards safety. As will they. The battle turned in that moment, not because of the tactical impact, but because of what it meant. Velithran ships began taking risks they never would have considered before, protecting human vessels, making sacrifices that the ancient protocols of their military had always discouraged, and the humans, inspired by what they saw, fought with a ferocity that made the Kreth commanders reconsider every assumption they had ever made about the short-lived species. Ambassador Alina Vasquez did not watch the battle from safety. She led a boarding party to the Kreth command station, a small team of humans and Velithrans tasked with capturing the fillets, evidence of genocide that would ensure the consortium could never escape justice. The fighting was brutal and close. Elena had been a combat medic before she became a diplomat, and those skills saved her life more than once as they pushed through corridors filled with desperate Kreth defenders. They reached the central data core with 3 members of the team dead and 2 more badly wounded. And Elena personally downloaded the files that would prove everything. Every communication ordering the plague's creation, every report celebrating the death toll, every cold calculation about how many Velithrans needed to die before the Dominion became weak enough to conquer. She emerged from the station as the Kreth fleet began its surrender, broadcasting the evidence to every ship, every planet, every corner of the galaxy that would listen. The war ended not with a final battle, but with a wave of revulsion that swept through the galactic community. As species after species saw the proof of what the consortium had done and turned away in disgust, the Kreth leaders were brought before a reformed galactic council. Their crimes lay bare for all to see, and for once justice was neither slow nor convenient. Salith Varani gave testimony that lasted 3 days, describing the plague, the deaths, the human volunteers who had come to help, and especially the sacrifice of Dr. Marcus Chun when she finished. The council voted unanimously for the harshest possible sanctions against the Kreth Consortium. It was over. But for Salith, something else was just beginning 6 months after the war ended. The Matriarch of the Velithran Dominion set foot on Earth, the first of her kind to ever visit the human homeworld. She walked through cities that seemed impossibly young, past buildings that would be considered temporary structures on Velithran worlds, among people who lived and died in the blink of an eye by her standards. But she saw them differently now. She saw the art they created, knowing they would not live to see its full influence. She saw the children they raised, pouring everything they had into the next generation. She saw the monuments they built to their dead, not because they expected to live forever, but because they wanted those who came after to remember. She visited a small cemetery in California, near the ocean that Chun had described to Talon in his final days, and she found his grave marked by a simple stone with his name and the dates of his brief life. Salith stood before it for a long time. "I have lived nearly 3,000 years," she finally said, speaking to a man who could not hear her. "And you taught me more in 3 months than I learned in all that time." The wind from the ocean stirred the flowers that someone had left on the grave, and Salith watched them move in the sunlight. "Your people are not mayflies, Dia Chun. You are wildfires, brief and bright, and you change everything you touch." She knelt and placed her hand on the stone, feeling its warmth, feeling the weight of everything it represented. "I will not forget what you taught me. I will spend whatever years remain to me trying to be worthy of your sacrifice, and when I finally fade, I will tell everyone I meet in the darkness about the human who saved my world." She stood and looked out at the ocean, blue and vast and constantly moving. Just as Chun had described behind her, Elena Vasquez waited respectfully. "Having accompanied the Matriarch on this pilgrimage, the Chun Accords are ready for signing," Elena said. "The new galactic treaty, emphasizing cooperation between species, protecting the rights of younger civilizations, establishing funds for medical research." Salith turned to face the human ambassador, the woman she had dismissed as insignificant just a year before. "It is not enough," the Matriarch said. "It will never be enough, but it is a beginning." Elena smiled, the expression warm and genuine. "That's very human of you, Matriarch." Focusing on what comes next instead of what came before, Salith considered this and found that she did not mind the comparison. They walked together toward the waiting transport, two leaders from two very different peoples, united by the sacrifice of one man who had believed that helping strangers was worth dying for. The Chun Accords were signed the following day, witnessed by representatives from 47 species, establishing a new era of galactic cooperation that historians would study for millennia to come. And at the heart of it all, remembered in every clause and every provision, was the legacy of a human doctor who had lived 80 years, who would spend his final days saving people who had shown him only contempt, and who had changed the galaxy by simply being who he was. Humanity had come to the stars expecting rejection. Instead, they reminded the galaxy what it meant to burn, and the universe was brighter for it.